Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to graphics cards, few would argue that the Radeon RX Vega launch has been perhaps some of the most turbulent in history. Perhaps not just of graphics cards, but of any technology product in the last, let's say, 10 years. The number of leaks, the number of rumours, made even more complex with the New Frontier edition of the card, is absolutely mind-blowing. But still, the capsation event has been and gone, and AMD have provided official confirmation as to the specifications, the performance, the lineup of graphics cards, and finally the release date of these cards. So this video is going to be tackling just that, the new information that AMD have released, discussing performance data, that kind of thing. There will be another video in the next several days, which is going to be a more deep dive into the Vega architecture, in other words, what's changed from the older versions of GCN, and perhaps what the future could hold of AMD's graphics lineup, perhaps what even Navi could bring to the table. But with that said, we're going to start out with the more basic things like specifications before talking about performance and pricing and other such things. So there are 4 distinct graphics cards coming from AMD. AMD have confirmed the Radeon RX Vega Nano, but many of the specifications, such as clock speed, have not been confirmed. So I will touch on that very card in this video, but I'm going to leave it out primarily because we don't know enough information as yet. However, the other 3 SKUs we know an awful lot about. They would be the Vega 64 Liquid Cooled Edition, the Standard 64, and finally the Radeon RX Vega 56. And we are going to be comparing it against the RX 480 and 580 in this very video, along with the Radeon R9 Fury. In a moment I'll bring up the differences with the Liquid Cooled Edition, but for the moment I want to stick to the 2 reference models. So, Radeon RX Vega 64 has 64 compute units, much like the Radeon RX Vega 56 has 56 compute units. These numbers of course correspond to the number of compute units, yes, but also mirror the information that Apple released not too long ago on their own website. Stream processors then are 4096 versus 3584, a significant jump from the RX 480 and 580, but are very close to the R9 Fury. These are obviously very important when it comes to color compression and other such technologies. For those who didn't know, there are some significant changes when it comes to the actual Vega architecture, especially when it comes to the geometry and render backends as a whole. However, because that's quite an in-depth topic, I figure I'll leave that to a future video. Unsurprisingly, these cards feature HBM2 onside the board, and therefore we have 2 stacks, meaning a total bus width of 2048-bit, providing a rather ample amount of memory bandwidth of 484 GB per second. Finally, I do want to discuss power, TDP. So there are some actually pieces of conflicting news here. So I'm going to go with the one that seems to be the most prevalent in most websites. So it appears that you're looking at about 290 watts plus. That includes the board. That is for the non-water-cooled version of the Vega 64, whereas the Vega 56 is around 150 to 165 watts, 210 including the board. To put that into some level of context, and I don't want to necessarily turn this video into a price/performance ratio, but that's roughly equal to around 2 RX 480/580s, and is slightly more power hungry than an R9 Fury. There are a couple of other small caveats before I jump into the water-cooled version of this card. The first is that journalists have been discussing what has been enabled and disabled with the New Frontier edition of the card. Now you might recall that there were some who said that tile-based rasterization was disabled for the Frontier edition, and that appears to be confirmed by AMD. A couple of news outlets have reported that. The reason? Was it because there was something damaged with those particular cards? Was it because AMD wasn't doing it because of, secret source? No. Basically, it was pretty much time-based. They just needed the card out of the door. And in fact, the same could be said for power-saving features. there were power-saving features which were disabled for FE Vega. And once again, this was to basically get the card out the door. Essentially, if you were to look at when AMD promised Vega was going to be released, they didn't have long, and so they just decided, hey, we can't optimize this card enough to meet the deadline, so we're just going to have to kind of cut a few features, release the GPU. Now, in hindsight, they probably made a bit of a mistake there. It probably would have been better for them to wait a couple of weeks, maybe a month, for them to fix these issues, but hey, it is what it is. So this also means, according to what AMD and a few other news outlets are reporting, when AMD were kind of discussing all of this at the event, in theory, Vega should be better at keeping the clock speeds. Speaking of clocks, I do want to now bring up the liquid-cooled edition clocks versus the regular vanilla 64 and also the 56 versions of Vega. So obviously the clock speed is one of the primary differences. You have the boost clocks at 1677 MHz, 1546, and finally 1471. Memory bandwidth remains identical for the liquid and air-cooled version, but the 56, of course, has lower memory bandwidth, which equates naturally to the fact that it has lower performance. So what about half-precision peak performance? Well, you have 27.5, 25.3, and finally 21 T-flops. This also measures the same for the peak single precision, which is 13.7, 12.66, and finally 10.5. Pricing then. Pricing is actually pretty competitive. So we're blasting through this with the 56 variant of Vega, that is $399 US. The 64 reference, $499 US. The limited edition Vega 64, $599 US. And finally, the liquid cooled version is going to cost $700 US. Unfortunately, things are less clear when it comes to the actual release date. It does look like it's a paper launch, despite the fact that some vendors, including Asus, have already shown off their cards, but the release date has not exactly been penciled in to be like, you know, the 14th or 15th. But AMD and other vendors are saying that it's going to be about mid next month. So we can essentially assume, let's say, from the probably 11th, maybe up to about the 20th of next month. Well, what about performance? Well, many of us suspected this. I don't think any of us really expected it to hit the GTX 1080 Ti levels. I think many suspected it was going to be a GTX 1080, and that indeed, that is what AMD are pitting this card up against in its own internal testing. So essentially, you're looking at a card which is almost identical with the vanilla GTX 1080 reference design. So obviously, in the case of, let's say, if you were to buy a custom variant from MSI, Asus, or whatever, those cards are clocked much higher, in which case the Vega 64 would certainly fall behind, but then you could argue that a custom version of Vega with naturally higher clock speeds would then beat a vanilla 1080. So if you're talking standard design versus standard design, the two cards are virtually interchangeable. Currently, there are not exactly that many benchmarks available publicly. In fact, what we have here is 1440p ultra-wide gaming. Those are the results that AMD have decided to publish currently. And these, I'm assuming, are the range of Ashes of Singularity, Battlefield 1, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, Doom, Forza, Gears of War, Hitman, Sniper Elite, and Warhammer. So what you'll notice, according to their own results, is that there's about a 2-frame difference between the 1080 and the Vega 64, but minimum frame rates are higher on the Vega 64. And in a different test, Battlefield 1, they decided to pit Radeon RX Vega against the Fury X. Once again, this is across a variety of different resolutions. We have 1080p, 1440p, and finally 2160p. Now, obviously, 1080p, yes, you're definitely going to start running into GPU-bound scenarios, but at 1440p, 81 versus 98 frames a second, and at 2160p, 55 frames a second versus 41 frames a second, which some people are definitely criticizing that, and it's not exactly a massive jump, to say the least. The only other benchmark that I've found thus far, and I'm sure that in 2 days' time, I'm probably going to see a lot more results appear online, as are you, is an actual video from AMD themselves, and it is titled introducing a Radeon RX Vega that is on their official YouTube channel. It was uploaded on July the 30th, 2017, obviously. And it pits a RX Vega 64, a standard edition 1080, and a Fury X. And they show the 99% min as well as the average frame rates. Well, I feel that you can probably see the results yourself. In those results, they have Doom at 3440 by 1440, ultra settings, Vulkan, and I'm just going to stick with the average frames per second, 93, 83, and finally 71. So you're looking at about a 20 frame per second lead between the Vega and Fury architectures, which is not exactly super exciting. Like, I would personally, if I saw this and I was a Fury owner, I wouldn't be convinced. That's not exactly the result which would convince me I want to plonk down several hundred US$. Of course, yesterday, pricing information, just to go back to pricing just for a moment, pricing information did leak a little early, and I'm sure AMD were a bit pissed about that, but hey, it is what it is. Now, in those leaks, and I'm just going to quickly cover the same ground again, this means that Nvidia are slightly more expensive than AMD, and obviously we're talking averages here. I'm sure that there are going to be some cards with Vega which are considerably more expensive, and some cards which are going to be quite a bit cheaper than, let's say, you know, what you'd expect. And the same thing could be said for the 1080, but generally AMD are slightly cheaper in these cards. AMD, of course, would also very much like you to remember that FreeSync makes things even better value. So if you perhaps want to buy a new monitor and a GPU, things definitely are certainly cheaper for Team Red. There is also one other thing to take into consideration, and that is the whole bundle situation. Now here's where things get a bit sticky. AMD are introducing Radeon Packs, so you get a couple of free games. 2 is what they're listing here. Up to $100 off from a Ryzen 7 and motherboard combination, and $200 from a FreeSync monitor. The games are definitely nice because, well, it's a game. This is for the Aqua Pack, which provides you more goodies, and then obviously the Radeon Red Pack provides you less goodies. Finally, you get $200 off of a FreeSync monitor, or rather up to. Obviously, I'm not saying you should buy the Aqua Pack, for example, if you don't need that stuff. For example, let's say you already own a decent FreeSync monitor and you've already just upgraded to Ryzen 7. Let's face it, a lot of you have. I've had a number of messages from people who have already bought their motherboards, have already bought their processors. Or, let's say you don't want a Ryzen 7, just playing devil's advocate. What if you want X299 or X399? It doesn't appear that this makes any difference at all. So if that's the thing and you want a Threadripper board, for sake of argument, and you've already got a decent monitor, then this pack means absolutely bupkis to you. So that's definitely something to take into consideration. This video is already getting pretty lengthy, so I think that's a good place to call it. I feel that it pretty much answers the new questions we have of Vega that have popped up over the past few days. And in my opinion anyway, it gives us enough for you to make at least a decision of whether you're interested in Vega. Now I'm going to say the same thing I've said in several other videos, and you're probably sick of me saying it by now. Don't buy the card if you really are still unsure. Don't plonk your money down. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't pre-order it at all. I do feel that the card's going to be pretty limited in supply on launch because, as I said, it's a paper launch. So if you already own a FreeSync monitor and you already have a decent setup ready and waiting to go, then by all means, plonk your cash down. If you feel this is a good value card, for example, the RX Vega 56, you've got a 1440p monitor, which is FreeSync, then you might as well just go for it, because let's face it, there's not going to be a better AMD card coming up anytime soon. I doubt there's going to be major price cuts anytime close to launch. So really, your choices are either to grab the Vega card or perhaps go with a 580 Crossfire setup, not exactly the best value for money, or you could go with Nvidia, and therefore, of course, you're losing FreeSync, and you might have to sell your FreeSync monitor. It's not really the best option. But for everyone else who is kind of on the fence, do wait for reviews. We're probably going to be getting a card to review ourselves anywho. So that's definitely something for you, my friends, to take into, as usual, consideration. Just final thing, today, slash probably today, it looks like I'm going to be able to put it up today. I'm going to be doing a Threadripper overview as well, because AMD have released some more information on that. I was going to put it in this video, but I kind of figured this would be wordy, so I didn't want to kind of make this video even wordier, which is ironic, and there will be multiple reviews coming up over the next few days. I have a B350 motherboard review, which I've already started working on. The i7-7820X review is about halfway done. I had a couple of requests for me to put that up, even though I wasn't going to do it anyway, but people requested I did, so I'm working on it. There's going to be a memory review coming up over the next few days as well, and some other bits and pieces. And of course, then we're going to continue the Vega coverage with the launch and reviews of that as well. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, subscribe, give me internet cookies and hugs. I shall see you soon. Bye for now.